Hello and welcome to the Volunteer Development Series brought to you by Diamond Valley Basketball. I am Pat Delizio, the General Manager of DVBA, and today we are talking about how to drive participation and retention within your club. To do this, I am joined by Sophie Byrnes, our Co-Community Development Manager, NBL1 player, upcoming Masters graduate, an all-round awesome person. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Pat. Good to be here.
Is that right? Is that Masters graduate? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I didn't ask before. I thought I'd just give it a go and see if I got it right, because I ask often and I always forget.
No.
What is it? Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're finishing up with your studies?
Yeah. So studies are all finished now. I'm just waiting to actually get the top hat graduation all done and dusted. But yeah, so essentially I did my research thesis on sport sociology in general, but looking at gender inclusion in community basketball. So I went into and worked with a local basketball organisation and conducted a gender inclusion program with a few of their volunteer coaches in the domestic space. So essentially it was all about trying to make their environments more inclusive and supportive to girls and women in their basketball space. So essentially what my research was about was documenting the entire process of this co-creation of the gender inclusion program, and essentially just identifying the facilitators and challenges that go upon conducting such programs and doing gender equity work. So essentially the past 20, 30 years, we know what the barriers are for women and girls playing sport, but we haven't seen a major change in these participation numbers. So I thought, well, there must be something that's going on that's making it so difficult to do this gender equitable work. So essentially my research was about documenting this entire process.
Amazing. Well, we'll get into that, because that's one of the questions I have, is that stuff, which is awesome and super relevant. Thesis done, obviously. How many words? How many hours you reckon put into that?
Geez, it's all a blur because it was during lockdown, so that was a very difficult time for everyone. But I think in the end I had it was around 40,000 words. I think the maximum was 50. So
that's gross.
A bit under that. So 40,000 words, and I couldn't even tell you the amount of hours. I think most of those hours are just staring at a computer screen, trying to find motivation. But it took me, the entire Masters took me just about 18 months.
Yeah, wow. Wow. And glad, obviously, it's done now.
Oh, very glad. Yeah. Very glad, yeah.
Yeah. Does it get published? Like, what happened? Can it get published?
Yeah, so it's been sort of published through the university, but I've actually had the chance to present it at a few conferences. So I presented at the Australian Sociological Association conference.
Amazing.
At the end of last year. And then about a month ago now, I presented at the International Sociological Association conference that was being held here in Melbourne, which was, such a fantastic opportunity. I couldn't imagine sort of presenting internationally. It was sort of broadcasted all over the world.
Can we get a copy of that? Was that somewhere floating around?
I can try and dive deep. I know it was.
We're going to put the link in. I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out, and we're going to send it out to people to watch.
Yeah.
And listen, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And that was one of the things that obviously we jumped at when you sort of went for this role was how good would it be to have someone like that in amongst it all. So no, that's cool. And you've been obviously going out to clubs as CDM and seeing people. What have you found? Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and how you found things out there in domestic land at DV.
Yeah, it's been really good sort of developing relationships with all the clubs, especially not being a DV junior. I think I got to sort of start a clean slate. I didn't know anything about them, so it's been really cool, meeting all the presidents and everyone who actually runs these clubs, working with them to do whatever I can. So essentially it was kind of good in a way when I came into the role. It was coming to the end of the domestic season. So, essentially it was all just about meeting people, trying to get my name out there, seeing what the issues were, if they were having any problems, what I could start planning for the next domestic season. So now that it's started, ball's rolling. I've been doing many training visits, just supporting the sort of new coaches, especially the new ones, but even some that, have been coaching for a while and just want, some new ideas and a bit of inspiration as well. And also just to help, do a helping hand as well, even if they just want, to take a training off sort of thing get me in, run it for them. Yeah. I'm always happy to do anything like that. So, the training visits have been fantastic, meeting all the teams as well. I even ran a coach development, I guess it was sort of coaching the coaches, a training session. Got, a really great turnout with a lot of different level coaches, different experience, some brand new, some of that have been coaching for quite a while. So it was good to just keep things broad, keeping, obviously doing the fundamentals, but also, throwing in some new drills. And actually, getting the coaches to do it. I think that was actually a bit of fun. Yeah.
That's why it makes it more fun.
Yeah. No,
was that Green Hills? Because I spoke to, I spoke to president there, and he was saying, he goes, I'll go along, I've been coach for a while, whatever. And he's like, I actually got some really good new stuff out of it. So that's awesome. It's so important.
Yeah. And I got really great feedback from it. So I was really happy with that. And, from there, we're going to, try and go a little bit further down the track as well, breaking it up into some age group ones, doing drills and, particular drills for different age groups and, just sort of fine-tuning some of the stuff that I was doing with them at that session. But, it was good, got them to do some drills and, some they realised were a bit harder than maybe they thought. So, maybe they can sympathise with their players a little bit when they start running drills.
Yeah, they'll forget very quickly, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that a little bit. And speaking from obviously maybe a club's perspective, what do you think, in your opinion, some fundamental things that are going to be generic and be for boys and girls keeping kids in the game? Because obviously we see that, we've got a really big under-8s competition, probably one of the biggest in, the state, feeding into under-10s, and obviously it drops off a little bit as the kids get older for obvious reasons, and we'll dive into that a little bit. But what are some fundamental things that clubs can do to make sure that every year they're going, okay, at the bottom end, we're covered?
It's a really good question because a lot of the time we see, just wanting to get participation numbers up. That's sort of the key focus. How do we get more players in? How do we, branch out and get as many players in as we can? But I'd say the first step is to actually just reflect on your own practice within the club. So this reflection is super important because, we see a lot of times that clubs, and this is for all different sports as well, they look to come and try days. And this is especially for women and girls as well. Conducting come and try days, which is a fantastic way to get people interested, get people in the door. But if you think about it, if you actually reflect on your own practices within your club and you find that, maybe your club governance isn't really where it's at, maybe your coaches, you find out from a survey there's been some abuse thrown around, or the actual environment that your club environment, if that's not up to scratch, it's great to get all these players in, but they're not going to last a season. And that's where we see that major drop off as well when we get to the under 14s.
Sort of one in, one out type thing. You're not really making progress.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say really focusing on that retention, and the way to do that is just you have to be super critical with yourself. And it's not you're listing all the bad things that you're doing. It's more ways that you can improve. And this is by getting the voice of the people that are within your club, and not to take offense, but to see that how can you grow as a club? Well, maybe there's some areas that, need some adjusting, and just be willing to sort of work on those areas rather than getting as many people in as possible, which is a fantastic way to increase your participation numbers. But I'd say it's really about reflecting on your club environment, and how these players are actually experiencing.
Yeah, knowing who you are, right? Like
Yeah.
it's really important. And I think like it's a really, really good point to make. Another addition to that also is like if you're just continuously growing as a club, where are you going to put the teams to? Like training venues are pretty scarce now. And if you don't have somewhere to put your players, is growth really part of what you should be doing? Should there be all that other stuff that you got to tick off, governance, coach development?
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's sort of a lot of the times what you see, and again, this is across all sports, is that a major inhibiting factor is facilities. And that's the first thing that they go to. We don't have the facilities, we need more facilities. And it is has a major impact on getting people in. But it's not the only thing. And I think sometimes people are just so focused on growing and growing and growing. And, you're always going to need more facilities.
Yeah.
In a sense. So It's like with what you have, yes, you can fight for more facilities, you can do all you can. But with what you have, you want to perfect that, all right? You want to make sure that whatever you've got, all right, that it is the best run club that you can possibly do. And even with the facilities as well, just to touch on, I think one of the big things that I want to focus on, especially in this position, is the collaboration through clubs. I don't think, yes, it's competition and I love the competitive nature, but I always think it's competition on court and collaborate off court. We want to make each club the best that they can be. And if you've got a wait list of all these players, wouldn't you rather them see them take the court? It might be in some different colours, but that, you've been a factor in getting that player on court, whether it's through your club or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we find that. So we do like quarterly presidents forums since I started a couple of years ago. And every single time it's, we open the floor and let people, just talk about what they're struggling with. It's the same across the board. Everyone's going through the same stuff. And some people are a little bit more ahead in governance than others. So they might go, okay, does anyone got a policy for this or a template for this? And no one's ever said no. Like no one's ever shied away from actually sharing their stuff. And we even do it at association level. Like I contact another GM or CEO and say, hey, what have you guys got for this? What have you done in this situation? And every single time people are there to help. And I think that's a massive one. Collaboration is huge.
Yeah.
Like, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask the questions because people will more than often than not help.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a big part of that as well is that, you need to think about, even though you're within your club during training, you're playing against all other teams. So if you're hiding what you're doing because you don't want to share what you're doing with others, but then other clubs, they've got a, hostile environment and they're producing, not good coaches or things like that. Well, when it comes to your turn to play against those teams, that's affecting your own players in a sense.
Sure.
So it's like, it's not just helping others, it's also helping yourself as well if you want to think about it.
You're helping you're contributing positively to like the environment, generally.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. So let's talk specifically about female participation and retention. And we'll touch on coaches in a little bit because that's all part of sort of what we want to talk about today as well. And the volunteer aspect of that as well. We're talking about everything, not just players today. Female participation, we've known for years that there's a drop off from 14 onwards. Correct me, just stop me if I'm wrong. Like that's not right. But what would you know? 14 years onwards, female participation rate sort of goes off a little bit of a cliff. Basketball, we've got the actual figures that we've seen around, what is it?
70-30.
Yeah, right. So, and that's
approximately.
We're actually at DV, I think we're at about a 37 participation rate for female to male, which is above the national standard, which is great. but we're not content with that. And it seems to me, from someone who has not done a master's in this specific space, that there doesn't seem to be like this direct answer to what it is. And we've been trying to figure it out for years, and it's been guessing. It's, well, girls like, just being sociable more at that time, and they concentrate more on studies than boys do. Footy's been a factor. Maybe that's more a sociable sport than it is basketball. You're in and out within 2 hours in basketball. Footy, you're sort of there the whole day, and you have this camaraderie and more people, all that sort of thing. And I guess we're seeing that more with footy growing with girls now as well. What have you seen in your journey throughout your studies and being out there with these clubs and stuff? Is there an answer? What do you think are the contributing factors?
So I'll just go off sort of what I did in my research. And
if you can read your 1,000-word thesis for us right now, that'd be great. Thank you.
I can't look at it still. And it's such a hard question. And that's why, when I set out to do my own research, I didn't want to go out there to answer that specific question because I knew it was just about impossible. So that's why I just focused on what challenges there were. And it's funny when we talk about the barriers, a lot of the time the first thing that people say is, why girls drop out. It's like, well, they're focusing on school. They're at that age where, they want to be more social. They've got parties.
Seems guesswork to me.
And you just got to answer, you're like, well, what are boys doing? They've got the exact same things. They do school. They, they've got their own parties. They've got other sports. So, sort of questioning, and that's what I wanted to do, sort of just like question these common sense or these sort of taken for granted assumptions that people just make, and there's no real answer. It's just sort of the way that life is. So that's what I kind of wanted to do with my research. So in going through, I guess the biggest outlining factor that I saw was just the emphasis on elite development through community sport. And it definitely goes both ways for girls and boys. You see the drop off for boys' participation as well, but it's the detrimental drop off that we see for girls. That is a lot more. Essentially what I saw when going through, and the whole point of the program was to try and co-create these gender inclusive strategies for women and girls basketball. And I thought the best way to do that was to work with coaches in that environment. Who am I to come in and, tell them what to do? This is exactly what you need to do. So that's what was really great about this co-creation sort of way that I did it, this co-creation framework. I was going in and letting them answer the questions. But what I realized was that, and you can see it sort of all the time, it's this notion of there's one pathway in basketball, and that is to start off in your domestic comp, or even, going down to our little Eagles. You go from that, you go up to domestic. Once you've done domestic, or, once you're getting a little bit older, that's when you go into rep. From rep, that's when you go into youth league. From youth league, that's when you go into, for us, NBL 1. It's this one pathway and one trajectory that only focuses on the elite development and elite excellence. And even when we were looking at trying to, create these gender inclusion strategies, it was always the whole focus was, how do we make our girls better? We want the girls to be able to play like the boys. And 100% pathways is a major contributing factor as well. And I, don't discount that whatsoever. But it was the overemphasis on pathways being the only answer to increase participation of women and girls. When you think about it, if we go all the way to Little Eagles under 8s, you're saying how big our under 8s domestic competition is compared to our NBL 1 women's, where we've got 10 people on the squad. So you have a competition with hundreds of kids all trying to filter through that, what it is, a pyramid system. And in order for it to be a pyramid system, you need drop-off. You can't have a rectangle.
100%. You're talking about, like, even we've got 45 junior rep teams. That accounts for less than 10% of our entire playing cohort.
Exactly. So in order for the pyramid system to work, you need the drop-off.
Yeah, you're kind of playing into that.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and this 100% goes both ways, but I saw it especially be detrimental for women and girls' participation because these were the strategies that they were coming up with.
So was it like, oh, if I'm going to keep playing, I have to move through this pathway? Was that sort of the perception?
Yeah, or it was more just making, programs or looking at coach development, but more in a technical side. How can we better develop our coaches to make our girls even better so that they can progress through the pathways?
Okay. Yep.
Instead of, like I was saying before, reflecting on what the coach's practice is. I sort of divvied it up into two ways. We've got the technical knowledge of coaches, or you've got the inclusive practice of coaches.
Okay.
Whereas the focus, obviously for elite development, they're always going to go to the technical. How do we make our coaches better so that we can develop our girls? Which, again, is a very important part of it.
Yeah.
But I would argue the inclusive practice and making that environment for the women and girls a safe, enjoyable one where they can be themselves, where they can socialise with friends, that's the most important thing to keeping girls in the game.
Yeah.
If there's too much focus on this elite development, you're going to have some kids excel. And I know this because that was my pathway through basketball. So I really got to reflect on my own pathway as well, because the pyramid system, it worked for me. I started out playing domestic and I loved it. And I, trained extra hard and I got into rep and I got into the youth league and I got into the NBL 1. So it worked for me.
All right, don't brag.
But it essentially did. But you think about...
But there's not, point is, it's not 6,000 players trying to play NBL 1.
Exactly.
Right? It's not,
Yeah, there's one team within a club that you have hundreds and hundreds of kids apparently progressing to, which is never going to work.
Yeah.
So that's what I found was the biggest detriment, is that we were focusing too much on this elite development. How do we progress these girls to be the best that they can be? It's like, well, why don't we just make it a really enjoyable environment and open it up to girls that doesn't matter if they, still can't dribble a ball or catch a ball. But if they're having a great time, then who cares?
So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some things that the clubs can do to create that sort of environment? Yeah,
I think...
and coaches out there too, obviously. Like, what is, if you're coaching girls or even boys basketball, how do you make that environment enjoyable?
Yeah, I think, like I was just saying at the start, you need to step back and sort of reflect, especially, the language that we use.
Yeah.
The technical language that, it's sort of ingrained in us. And that's what I think I've found progressing through from when I started out, because, again, it worked for me. So I was happy to continue that way, My, I shouldn't say early coaching days, when I think back, a few years ago, I was all about, that elite development. I was doing the indies. I was, going through academies, coaching kids. I was, contributing to that. But it wasn't for, a couple of years into it, I thought, this isn't what I'm passionate about. Yeah. It's the programs, it's the inclusion programs, it's the, entryways to basketball. It's the, still working on skills, but in a fun capacity. So that's what I think for coaches as well, just to really reflect on what your motivation is. Okay, what are you projecting to the girls or the boys that you're coaching as what's the most important thing? And I think if you do that, and if it's not fun, or if it's not enjoyment, and if it's all just about winning and it's all just about being the best, then I think, something about reflecting. And I think
you've got to strike that balance though, right, as well.
Of course.
I think like there is a part of everyone that play, even if they're purely playing for enjoyment, that if they feel like they're getting better at something gradually, like they want to, that's part of the enjoyment too,
of
right?
Course.
But you can't be all in on one thing or the other.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think a big thing about that is understanding the motivations of your players.
Yeah, okay.
And keeping that in mind and always going back to that, getting their feedback as well. Of course, if you see progression in your skills and, you make your first 3-point shot or things like that, obviously internally that's going to make players feel really good.
You made your first one this year. So
yeah. Took me a while. But yeah, I think it just always goes back to what your player's motivation is to play. And if it is, you've got a group of kids that they want to be the best they can be. They want to, work super hard at training. They want to do sprints. If they want to do sprints or training and that's what they want to do, then you go ahead and do that. But I think it's understanding what they want before you start your training plan, before you go into a season.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you don't get that awkward mid-season discussion with them as well, and then it's downhill and then they don't come back type thing too. Environment-wise, like we always talk about, when we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about taking away barriers pretty much. And we're really, I think, like in Diamond Valley, just socioeconomically, like generally, like we're pretty lucky. And, there's always going to be barriers like for people out there. When we talk about female participation, you spoke really specifically then about language and that sort of thing and understanding the motivations of your athletes. What are some other barriers that you sort of see out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, a big one, if you think about sort of the two biggest barriers, is always time and cost.
Sure.
When you look at, and that's going for participation in general as well, but they're obviously two very big factors. Obviously the just not having the time because of other competing priorities, like we were saying. But again, that's when you sort of reflect on why isn't that a priority. Yeah,
and so that's in that discussion piece too, right? Like that's if you have a frank conversation with your player. We're talking about having conversations with players. We could be talking about a 12-year-old here. And like, what if 12-year-olds don't know? You know what I mean? Like, is that a point where the coach has a discussion with the parent? Like, how do they gauge that understanding from the player? When maybe they're still really young and they don't really understand.
Yeah, no, 100%. And especially when you're working with young kids, it's always hard. But agree with meeting with parents. I would say, and I would always suggest prior to commencing your season, if they're new, they're old, if you've worked with them before, it really doesn't matter. Always checking in with parents in a group setting, checking in throughout the season as well, just to assess, if their child's happy, because, obviously being a small child, you might not be as comfortable expressing to a coach that, you're not having fun, and that's where you do go to parents. But, I think sort of all kids can gauge whether what they're doing they enjoy / not. You have players in Little Eagles, and sometimes that they don't enjoy basketball, and that's completely okay. So I think even if you've got under 8s, you've got under 10s, it really doesn't matter. Kids will know whether they're having a fun time.
It's true. And
whether they're not, and it may be difficult, but helping them sort of understand, well, why aren't you having fun? Is there anything that you want to do? And whether that's they want to play more games, then that's what you do.
Well, it was really interesting. I went to a Basketball Australia Coaches Conference, I don't know, about 4 years ago, something like that. And Nathan Burke, who's the head coach of the Western Bulldogs women's team in the AFL, FLW, he spoke about his daughters, I think, are good either footy players or basketball players. Just got a cracker start to this story. But anyway, he was talking about coaching a young female team, and it's the first time he'd coached them before he went into obviously where he is now, and he's struggling big time with just getting buy-in and stuff like that. And he talked about what was fun to them, because from his point of view, what's fun to him is very different to what's fun to a 14-year-old girl. So he put it in their hands and just asked the question, really speaking to what you were saying then, what would make training more fun for you guys? What do you want? And they said it was something like, could we just have some music during warm-ups? So they got a speaker out. They could choose the music.
Yeah.
And immediately, it was just a shift in mentality from wanting to come to training because it was someone's turn to choose the music or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So understanding that what you might think is fun as an adult coach because you think that's what's been good for you as a basketball player in the past or whatever may not translate to what exactly is fun for a kid.
Yeah.
So really gauging that buy-in is important.
Yeah, it's 100%. And I think as well, if there's been, of course, there are a lot of beginner coaches that are just parents and they may not have any experience playing basketball at all. But if you do have coaches that, have gone through the ranks, they've played all their life, and obviously their memory is probably at more of a higher end. So where the focus is probably more on winning, doing the best you can. So it is always super difficult. So that example's fantastic, and I always find a good one as well, even if it's just once a training, it's, you pick a certain player and you take it in turns and they can pick one drill. And it can be absolutely anything. It can be an actual training drill or it can be a fun game. And if that game has nothing to do with basketball, it doesn't matter because that's their turn and that's what they chose. So, just sort of getting in it, exactly what you're saying. It's not, if you think about it, sport is the way it's structured and organised. It's organised by adults, but it's mainly for kids.
Yeah.
So that's what we always need to remember. As much as adults are organising it, they're structuring it, they're planning it, essentially it is for kids. So we need to make sure it stays that way. Yeah,
and to be clear as well, it sounds like we're trying to give more work to voluntary coaches. But also it takes a lot of work out of it in the future. You don't have to have those really stressful, difficult conversations. You're not left questioning yourself and why kids aren't coming back, and then you feel bad about, the time that you put in and all that sort of stuff. So you kind of, the pre-work is there, maybe a little bit more, but in the long run it's going to hopefully pay off. Yeah. Right?
And a coach's job, you can't the volunteer aspect of it, expecting new beginner coaches to complete their coaching courses and keep up to date and know everything about every single player, volunteers. I think that's the big thing about it. But it's exactly what you're saying. If you yourself can do whatever it is that you can to make sure that each player are having fun in their own way, well, that's going to translate to you as well. You're a part of that team just as much as the players, and you want to have a fun and enjoyable season just as much as the players do.
Absolutely. And I'll mention as well, so I mentioned at the very beginning you're the co-CDM, so Raquel Connell is also does work with us, and she's available to go out and do workshops and stuff like that. And I think those key parts of those things that both you and Raquel are doing is because I think new coaches that come in, and we're talking about retention with volunteers, coaches and players, to get coaches putting their hand up again for the next season, confidence is a major part of it, right? Just knowing what to do on game day. And I think parents or people don't put their hand up sometimes because they're like, I've never coached basketball before. Oh, what the hell's going on game day? I just rock up, just watch my kid before. How do I do even court time? What do I say in a timeout? When do I call a bloody timeout? What do I do in warm up? It's just chaos and whatever. So we can cover all that stuff for you. We can, just put your hand up, reach out to your club. They'll reach out to us and we'll get someone to come visit you. But that's I think that's a big barrier for people putting their hand up, right?
Oh, for sure. And I think as long as, try and break it down as easy as you possibly can. If your players are having fun, then that's the easiest thing you need to do. Doesn't matter if you yourself can't, shoot a basketball, if, you can't do any tricks or things like that. And I think that's obviously a big part of it. It's like, well, I don't play basketball, so how am I going to teach kids how to play? I think, like you're saying, any help at all, obviously Raquel and I will always be there but just the absolute bare minimum is doing whatever it is that you can to make sure that your players are having fun.
If they come back, then that's a win.
That's a
You've done
big
your
tip.
job.
That is a big tip. And if the coach comes back as well,
then you've done your job as a club.
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Exactly.
We've been talking for like 35 minutes.
Wow.
That's pretty good. So I've got one last standard question I'm going to ask everyone that does these. What is your earliest memory of attending a sporting event, and what is your favourite sports food when you go and watch a game?
Yeah. Earliest sports event, trying to think, would be, I think there's two. I guess major sporting event. I do remember going to the Commonwealth Games that were in Melbourne when I was a child, and it was just the athletics, and I don't remember a whole lot about it. I think it was kind of just a day where there was a few different events going around, but I thought, this is pretty sick.
Going to watch the javelin,
Yeah, it was just a bit of random, all the field events and things like that. But yeah, I remember that. Just what an awesome opportunity just to be there sort of for a national or international, I should say, event. But one that's probably a little bit clearer is my first basketball game, and this was just, Big V. I remember sort of as probably 10 or maybe a bit earlier. Watching sort of the Big V senior women and senior men.
Over at Hume?
Yeah, that would be at Hume City. Because, I did all the camps with all of the senior players. So that was, me going to support. They invest a bit of time in me and my development, so go and watch them play. So, that's what, I always sort of remember as, probably one of my first experiences watching sport, which was pretty cool because I think now I'm that
full
person
circle,
and
hopefully
people are doing the same to me and my teammates. But sports food, I don't think I can go past hot chips. I think they're a staple. They're everywhere. I can count on them, sort of thing.
You don't go meat pie option?
Well,
no.
I really did think meat pie, but I'm a very particular eater, and I don't like making mess in public. I would 100% go meat pie if I was in the comfort of my own home, but I couldn't do meat pie in public. So hot chips, they're the way to go.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I think it was awesome today. I hope a lot of people out there get something out of it. And if you've got any questions out there, please send them through to us. The email will be on the description. But Soph, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for your time, Pat. Been a pleasure.